Howdy, YouTube neighbors. JC Locke here, and well, it's Monday morning after completing our 14-episode miniseries featuring the Succubus clan, so you know what we're doing today. It's time for the clan review. So, YouTube neighbors, let's talk. I may have done the rest of the custom clans a disservice when I chose to play Equestrian first, because Equestrian set the bar super high, and I'll be honest, I have a hard time believing any of the others will meet that standard. To that end, I won't be comparing Succubus or any other custom clan to Equestrian, but will be reviewing and judging it based on its own merits. So I call the Equestrian clan a nuclear bomb delivered by IKEA. So, what would I call the Succubus clan? I believe I would call it a sarin gas shell delivered from the safety of a sealed bunker. In short, the Succubus clan is pretty overpowered, and while the first couple rings might feel shaky, after ring 3 you will almost never feel like you are in any kind of danger while the enemy runs around the train killing themselves. The reason for this is one of the clan's two primary mechanics, Frantic. Frantic is essentially super daze. Instead of your opponent doing nothing, your opponent is hitting themselves and each other. In itself, this is a powerful mechanic, but the proliferation of that mechanic within the clan is really what's the issue. To demonstrate what I mean, let's compare it to days. So the clan with the most days available is Stygian. And within Stygian, that represents two cards. One, let me just pull it up real quick. Days. Come on, JC, you can do this. One uncommon, which is pretty much an auto pick when you see it, and a rare that is situational. And artifact-wise, there's also Light's Gift, but that only works on one floor. Oh, and Concussive Coals, I guess, but let's be real. That's a kid's table artifact at best. Now, on the other hand, let's take a look at Frantic. Okay, ignoring Vitality Extraction here because it doesn't actually grant Frantic, we have a grand total of 10 instances, not counting champion capabilities. 4 common spells, 1 common unit, 2 banner units, one of them uncommon, one of them rare, and 1 uncommon spell that delivers Frantic to the entire floor, and then 2 rare spells that do. Simply put, that's just way too much Frantic available. And the problem with that is twofold. Frantic is such a powerful mechanic that you have a hard time picking anything else when Frantic is available, and it's so available that you're almost guaranteed to see it every single run. So, every single Succubus clan is, by default, a Frantic run, unless you go out of your way to make it not a Frantic run. So, I want to turn our attention now to the other Succubus mechanic, Frantic. As someone whose eyes have seen over 4 decades of use, I really do wish that the two mechanics, Frantic and Fanatic, had, a greater difference letter-wise. But, that's honestly really never here nor there. So Frantic is, in a vacuum, a really fun and interesting mechanic. It turns Blights and Scourges into survival, scaling, and utility. However, mechanics in a roguelike deck builder do not exist in a vacuum, and must be examined as a function of the rest of the game's mechanics. So, let's start with the obvious, Sinner Salve exists. Where are you, Sinner Salve? Oh, come on. There we go. Sinner Salve exists. Sinner Salve is basically a binary switch that turns Fanatic from a good mechanic into a ridiculously overpowered one. The closest comparison I could make to another clan is Founding Seal for incant runs. But despite both being auto picks, Sinner Salve is still stronger in that context, without even considering that it boosts the power level of a Succubus deck that doesn't lean into Fanatic, and just has some incidental shard generation. So, now that Sinner Salve is out of the way, There's a fundamental design problem in Clan with cards that generate Vengeful Shards, including the one generated by our champion, Plague Shadow Lady. And that problem is that Vengeful Shards that are generated by Succubus Clan mechanics do not purge, they consume. Now, at first glance, that's not really a huge distinction, but that distinction is actually huge in the context of artifacts like refracting lenses and Trader's Quill that trigger any time a card is consumed. Now, these artifacts are balanced in-game by consume being a limited resource. Succubus Clan cards, however, completely ignore this balancing assumption. Now, I believe I showcased pretty clearly in the 14-episode miniseries just how insanely powerful these two artifacts become in the hands of this custom clan. Now, let's move on to the champions themselves. I want to reset these to 1 for a very specific reason. Starting with Shadow Lady, something should stand out to you. In 14 games, plus a couple played off camera, I have no Bloodthirsty 3 or Profanity 3 to show you. All 3 Shadow Ladies are good, so why did only Plague 3 appear in any of these runs? Well, the problem is in the champion scaling. Simply put, there is no pure Shadow Lady that is better than a multi-class Shadow Lady. Considering first the fact she takes up 3 space. That's insane when you look at her base stats. Spine Chief reaches triple-digit HP in all 3 versions at level 3, and Shadow Lady comes nowhere near close. Her closest comparison is Wildington, but even then, there are cases to be made for Thornlord 3 or Predator 3, because Thornlord 3 has 100 hit points, and Predator 3 has multi-strike too. All of Shadow Lady's versions follow Strangler's progression. No one takes Strangler 3 on purpose. And just like Wildington, each one of Shadow Lady's level 1 versions give a very strong benefit. Much stronger than the scaling of existing benefits provided by taking additional levels in her current class. Plague, with the Shard generation and the +1 Ember, just goes well with either of her counterparts, and Bloodthirsty and Profanity play very well together, much better than going straight Profanity or Bloodthirsty without the other would be. So there's practically no reason to go all in on one version of Shadow Lady when you can get a better champion every time by pivoting. Now, let's talk upside. I feel that Shadow Lady does an excellent job showcasing the full breadth of the clan's mechanics and playstyles. Plague showcases Fanatic, Profanity showcases Frantic, and Bloodthirsty showcases that Blood Carnival style scaling that affects both sides of the floor. She's just a fun champion to play, and her role as the default champion is very well fulfilled. Alright, moving on to the... I'll go ahead and leave these at 3. Moving on now to the Exile champion, Nightmare. Nightmare is the polar opposite of Shadow Lady, in that you pretty much want to keep him pure whenever you run him. Each of his 3 roles serves a very specific function. Abyss is a backline scaler. Illusion is a frontline tank. And Endless... Endless is... well, it's just plain weird. His Extinguish trigger doesn't play well with Reform because of the need for psionic stacks, and having him on your main floor is counterproductive because Frantic exists. I found him to be the most successful in Relentless, acting like a self-replicating speed bump to keep the boss away from my backline units. Regardless of the form, though, his base stats are more in line with his pip size than Shadow Lady, but his scaling is honestly equally unimpressive. I believe it's mostly due to the uniqueness of each of the 3 roles that pivots aren't as valuable here as they are for Shadow Lady. Alright, I want to move on now to what is probably my favorite aspect of this clan, the Sin Ghosts. There's 7 of them, as there's 1 for every sin, and these 7 non-banner units have a nice rarity spread that makes use of the Fanatic mechanic in fun and different and interesting ways. Now, of course, not all are created equal with, Lust Ghost and Wrath Ghost, hogging the podium here. But nonetheless, the fact that I mastered all 7 frames should be evidence that all 7 have their uses. They're just good design. They do exactly what the clan needs them to do, generate vengeful shards, and give those shards added value. Now, these are the only non-banner units in clan, so that makes a very nice segue into the banner units. Let's clear that out. Unit. Alright. So, in general, I'm always happy to see a Succubus banner, because all of the uncommon banner units are good. Chaos Creation, the Big Poop, is a crazy frontline tank that only ever takes 1 hit at most outside of Relentless every wave. Demon Pioneer is what Demon Fiend wishes he was, and honestly might actually be undercosted at 1 given his base stats and, somewhat powerful scaling ability here. Now, admittedly, it scales more on the HP side than the front side, but if that's your only scaling option, then that would usually be a problem. But in a clan with such heavy frantic generation, it probably really isn't. He just needs to survive Relentless. Uliadru, moving on, effectively acts as a sweeper that bypasses stealth. And Succubus Torturer is, let's call her Dollar Store Rail Beater. But she has a very important distinction from Rail Beater, and that's her essence. Her essence actually gives the apply melee weakness on strike, whereas Rail Beater just gives you armor for his essence. So, kind of 2 sides of the same coin when you're looking at that specific melee weakness style design. Alright, now there's 2 units, however, I feel merit deeper discussion. So, we'll start with Incubus Butcher. I really like Incubus Butcher as a strictly better Shattered Shell at 1 additional cost, but his infusion is a problem. I am all but convinced that there really is no cost that balances out granting sweep to any other unit. I am, however, 100% convinced that +2 cost just isn't enough. Monster Train has just way too many means of reducing costs and generating additional Ember for +2 cost to ever feel too high a price to pay for sweep. It also takes the best part of the Butcher and makes it an infusion, so making him almost strictly better as an infusion than a unit every time. And then there's Vrolikai. I'm going to level with you. I'm not sure what the design thought process was with Vrolikai. It's like, what if we take Animus of Will, give it yet another multi-strike, and double its health? We'll balance that out by making it Heartless. Yeah, let's just ignore the fact there's not actually any healing spells in the Succubus clan. Vrolikai is simply undercosted for what it does. And even its infusion grants multi-strike for no drawback if you weren't planning on doing any healing. Now, it still needs plus 25 hit points to be effective, but so does Animus. If Incubus Butcher didn't exist, Vrolikai would be the clear winner of the Succubus banner units. But even though Vrolikai wins, I'm going to say Butcher comes a close second. That being said, if you can infuse you a Butcher into a Vrolikai and get yourself a quad-striking sweeper for 3 Ember, well, forget the run. You just won all a Monster Train. And here's the part where I remind you, they are both uncommon banner units. So how do the 3 rare units compare to these 2 juggernauts? Well, I don't really think they compare. Like all rare units probably should, they kind of exist in their own design space. Shadow Warrior is a really fun permanent scaler that can get ridiculous in a proper Fanatic deck. Abyss Princess is straight broken if you can get her past her 1 hit point. She literally frantic locks entire enemy floors, and this ability does not shut off during Relentless. So basically, no enemy ever touches you again once she hits the floor, so long as she doesn't kill herself on spikes. Endless Shadow is the only one I never really played with, but he kind of feels like a mini version of Endless Nightmare. And having a unit that pretty much mimics the champion, that can't be bad. Alright, spell time. Let's start with common, because that's where the theme of the clan is found. There's not many of them, only 5, ignoring Deception because that's the Exile starter. Because there's only 5 because Ghosts are taking up design space at that rarity. When you pick a common in a clan, you're basically determining what kind of run you're looking to craft, and that's what a common should do. It should set the theme for your run. But therein lies a problem. Take a look at these spells, once again, besides Inception, and tell me what they all have in common. Every single one of them is a piece for a Frantic deck. Blood Carnival scales only if you're protecting yourself with Frantic. Mind Domination, Dread Shot, and Profane Ascending are all Frantic granters. And Pain and Pleasure gives you something to do with those Vengeful Shards if you're not going to be using them to fuel Fanatic. So, there are only 2 directions at the common level. If you want a Frantic deck, draft Ghosts. If you want a Fanatic deck, draft spells. There's 7 uncommon spells, because, once again, uncommon Ghosts exists. Now, thankfully, there's more variety to be found here. There's more Frantic generators, Vengeful Shard generators, and then there's a pair of cards that are broken by every definition of the word. So, let's set aside for the moment both Dangerous Game and Dark Fury, and talk about the others. For the Queen might be the only underpowered spell in the entire clan. I really like it as a means of killing endless ghosts, and it's perfectly on theme, but it consumes. Now, you could invest or remove consume and a -1 into it if you happen to find those in the magic shop, but I honestly think there are much better targets for that combination in clan. If I were to redesign it, I would reduce the gold gain to 5 or 10, remove the consume, and then probably make it free. That would give us a little bit of gold generation. It would give us a sacrifice outlet that we could play pretty much every time we see it. I think that's a good uncommon sacrifice engine card for me, and I would definitely have picked it more than the one time I picked it during the entire miniseries. So, Piercing Shriek is essentially Soul Cripple at -2 cost, but instead of 13 Reap, it pierces. I still think Piercing Shriek comes out on top. I think it's good. It does a job. There's a case for remove consume -1 in it, but it's a good card, and there's nothing wrong with picking it. Shadow Embrace is practically begging to make infinites. It draws 2 cards for free, doesn't consume, and balances itself out by adding 2 Vengeful Shards. So basically you draw 2, but there's 2 cards being added into the deck, so it's a net 0 overall. However, in Clan, there's means of turning those shards into both Ember Gain and draw. So, infinites are certainly possible. But even outside the realm of infinites, which is not a realm I venture into because I've got arthritis, it's a very strong card that replaces itself twice over and generates shards for later Fanatic triggers. Dark Pact is one of my favorite remove consume -1 targets in the entire game. Generating shards and just snowballing Ember Gain. Power Siphon is, just a strong tank buster when you invest some magic damage to it. And Mind Burning is a powerful targeted Frantic debuffer that could honestly create some insane scenarios, like in the penultimate video of the series where Divinity was hitting itself or the frontline unit 30 times around. Now, let's talk about those 2 broken cards. Let's begin with Dangerous Game, because this one's a little bit simpler. It looks fine on the surface, but there's unwritten text at the bottom of the card that says, "To all enemy units on the floor." This essentially turns Dangerous Game into a copy of Frenzied Swarm that doesn't discard your hand and has no downside as long as you clear the floor. Now that is just way too good for 1 Ember, and slapping Holdover on that means you have nothing to fear from waves and can just focus on Relentless. Then there's Dark Fury. Dark Fury is broken powerful in that it does not exclude bosses from getting their health cut in half. And Dark Fury is broken because it doesn't actually do that. At least the second time you play it, if you have remove consume on it or you have a second copy. I don't know how it works exactly, but I have straight killed bosses just by playing another copy of Dark Fury. It didn't cut their health in half like it said it was going to do. It reduced it to 0 outright. There are a couple examples on video of this happening in the miniseries. There's honestly really nothing more to say about that, so let's move on to the rares now. There are 2 rares that seem really powerful that I never got a chance to play because it just wasn't a good run for them. And honestly, that's fine. That's the design space that rare cards occupy and should occupy. They're about that excitement factor. And with one exception, they're all very exciting. That exception is Insanity Reach, which is very clearly a Succubus-powered flavored version of Siren's Song, which is still good if a niche use case. Paradox Tome, oh god, it's probably the only one that's truly overpowered for rare. It's definitely overpowered, period. It's an overpowered card, but of the rares, I think it's the only one I would consider overpowered. So you remember how I said that +2 cost is not a balancing factor for giving sweep to a unit? Well, 3 Ember and 3 Vengeful Shards is certainly not enough to do it without an infusion. I can't remember a time I saw a Paradox Tome and didn't pick it. It's just objectively the best rare spell available to any clan. One Horn's Tome is crying in a corner after Paradox Tome stole his girlfriend at the party. Yeah. So yeah. If we're making tier lists, and you know what, I might actually make a tier list once all is said and done with these custom clans. This is beyond S rank. This Paradox Tome goes in its own category. It is its own tier list. Okay, let's move on. Depression Whisperer. So, Depression Whisperer seems a bit underpowered when you look at it for rare at first glance, but I've managed to get triple-digit frantic stacks on that on Divinity using this card. It's resin removal on steroids. So the rest of the rares I won't comment on because they're clearly all powerful. It's plainly obvious what they do and how they contribute to the wind. So we've now covered all the cards. So let's hit those artifacts. There's one I want to talk about before we move on because I want to get it out of the way first, and it's the bad one. It's Flesh Ring. As seen in, I want to say, the penultimate video, maybe the one before that, it just doesn't work. It registers any card played as a Blight or a Scourge, and it doesn't draw any cards regardless. So, getting the bad out of the way, let's... Once again, this is at the time of this recording. You know, hopefully it's been fixed by the time you're watching it, but who knows. So the rest we'll cover one by one. Abyss Crown. It's a Win-More style artifact that can give you some pyre protection in the early game, but it quickly becomes irrelevant in the early game when you have proper frantic generation. Demon Blood is surprisingly underpowered, given that Trader's Quill does 10 times the amount of damage to the frontline unit as opposed to 3 to a random one. I think the design intent was to make a Succubus-flavored Teeth of Gold, but as an Umbra main player, I will testify that no one picks that artifact unless they're memeing. Desire Crystal is Succubus-flavored Queen's Tale, and it's just as good as Queen's Tale if you're playing Ghosts, especially Endless Ghosts. Flare Ribbon is an interesting design for the pyre buffing design space, but honestly, in Succubus, your defensive plan is probably going to involve frantic stacks, and the pyre is not likely to be directly attacked often. In the early game, though, it's a great pickup, and it's something you should definitely consider. Now, Mutant Elixirs. Oh boy, Mutant Elixirs. Mutant Elixirs is really interesting to me. I've both picked it up and passed it up. To me, it signifies a really good example of the power at a cost balancing philosophy. Multi-strike, obviously, universally sought after in Monster Train, but that +1 pip cost must really be considered, because it can mess with both your floor space and the order in which you play your units. When compared to, say, Gurg's Goad, it seems underwhelming, but outside that specific contest, it's an artifact like Sketches or Volatile Gauge that provides great power at a run warping cost. I really like it, and it's probably my favorite Succubus artifact. Nether Blossom is great if you're not running Blood Carnival, because it helps to ensure that the units you're making frantic are actually going to be strong enough to kill each other. Obsessing Aromatherapy is Succubus-flavored Light's Gift, and it's fine. Poison Serum is Succubus-flavored Abandon Antumbra, but instead of morsels, you get Vengeful Shards. Perfect in the right build, useless in the wrong one. Oh, Profane Crossbow. Profane Crossbow makes absolutely no sense in the design context of the Succubus plan, but I've picked it more than once, for no reason other than it's hilarious and it's fun to play. It makes a very satisfying noise and announces its presence like a shonen manga protagonist whenever it strikes the front unit, and it's honestly amazing in the early game, and in the mid-game it helps weaken tanks, but it becomes nigh useless in the late game. In terms of fun factor, though, it's a 10 out of 10. And finally, there's Shadow Cloak, which is Succubus-flavored Founding Seal. If you're running Fanatic, it's a must-pick. If you're not, you skip it. Not much more to say about it. So, that brings us finally to the final thoughts on the clan. If you're looking for a challenge, you will not find one in the Succubus clan. It's a very powerful clan with some very overpowered cards and a mechanic that ensures that you will never feel yourself in danger at any Covenant level. If, however, you're looking for a good time in a clan with a very strong thematic presence in its card design, then Succubus clan is definitely for you. And if you just want a Raffle Stomp monster train at any Covenant level, then Succubus just became your main clan. But, once again, you can always just find out for yourself. The clan is available for free on Steam Workshop. You just click a box and reload Monster Train, and you've got a Succubus army at your disposal. Thanks again to Pointer for creating the clan, and though I will admit I have been highly critical of the clan, I truly do appreciate the work that goes into creating custom content for fellow fans of a property without any expectation of compensation or remuneration. And I know that I lack the technical prowess to pull it off. But who knows? I mean, maybe in 16 years, when my kids are out of high school, if Monster Train is still a going concern, I might actually learn the skills required to bring to life the two custom clans that currently only exist as sketches in a design notebook on my shelf. Well, that's all for me, JC Locke. I hope you've enjoyed the Succubus Clan miniseries and review, and I hope to see you around for future content.